The exercise as such was reported to NATO to entail about 22,500 troops and to be conducted mainly in the territory of Belarus. And that was the case. The problem with the exercise is that in parallel with the core Zapad exercise, the Russian armed forces conducted exercises from the Arctic in the north down to Voronezh in the southwest, which is on the border with Ukraine. And if you try to compute how many troops were involved, you arrive at something like maybe 50,000 troops. And if you include the call-up of maybe 20,000 reserves in the Leningrad military district, you arrive at maybe 70,000 troops in the combined theaters, which is quite substantial. And if you add to this that the alleged purpose of the exercise was to combat the terrorist force that had entered Belarus and had entered urban environments, so it was an anti-terrorist operation. If we note that the Russians deployed heavy aviation, the Sukhoi 25 and 30 fighters and strike aircraft, and the heavy Mi-24 attack helicopter, and if we include that they conducted amphibious landings on the Baltic coast, supported by firing of ship-to-shore missiles from units in the Baltic Fleet, it doesn't really look like an anti-terror operation anymore. It was a massive display of joint operations, testing their new command and control systems. And it was very obvious a case of exercising an invasion of the Baltic republics from air, land, and sea. And this is the way Poland and the Baltic governments view it. Well, again, it's a matter of definition and who you talk to. I don't think NATO is overly impressed by Russian military proficiency. They're technologically way behind NATO. And if it really came to a real shooting war between Russia and NATO, it would end very badly for Russia. But that's sort of on the macro scale between NATO and Russia. If I'm in the government in Estonia or in Latvia, it looks very differently. Then it looks like Russia has vastly superior force and it can invade my country very quickly, and it will be very difficult for NATO to support me with conventional forces. So the governments in these small neighboring countries, although they are members of NATO, are feeling heavy pressure from Russia now. And this is very obviously the purpose from Moscow. Well, I'm not so sure it really does worry him. I don't think Putin fears that NATO is going to attack Russia, although this is part of Russian military doctrine. That is all for domestic consumption. And the fact that NATO, for the first time since 1993, is going to conduct a joint military exercise, exercising Article 5, which is joint defense, i.e., we are going to come to the assistance of a member state that has been attacked, being then one of the Baltic republics. This feeds into Putin's logic of portraying NATO as an enemy. If he can say, look, NATO is exercising war games in the Baltic republics and in Poland with us as the enemy, that really feeds into and enforces his ambition to present NATO as a real enemy to Russia, which then warrants spending billions and billions on upgrading the Russian military. Again, NATO does not really take this seriously, but the small countries that are wedged in between Russia and the old parts of NATO, i.e. the new NATO members, they look at it very differently. And NATO is now in a real pickle, because if it doesn't respond to the increasing patterns of militarization and of hostile exercises from Russia, then its new members will be increasingly worried, and NATO may be fractured, seriously fractured from within. And if it does respond with a counter force, then Russia is reinforced in its view that NATO is a real threat. So it's a catch-22. I mean, either way, NATO creates additional trouble for itself. And this is precisely what the Russians want.